Well, hello again, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us out here in this beautiful place. God's wonderful creation, study God's wonderful word, and enjoy fellowship with God's wonderful people. So good. So we are going to finish the book of Ruth today.
Are you loud enough for the people?
Am I loud enough for the people up there? Okay. Am I too loud? I can always turn it down if you get bored. So put in your earbuds. We're going to finish the book of Ruth today, and I'm excited about that. I wanted to, this book kind of took off real fast, and it slows down for some details in the middle, and then it starts accelerating again in the last chapter, so it goes very quickly. Last week, if you weren't here, and we Easterized this message. Again, we don't like do special services usually for Christmas and Easter. We just kind of do what we're doing, and we've got the Advent and the resurrection in view at all times, right? And I think you can find that in just about anything you're studying in the Bible. So last week, remember that if you were with us, and if you weren't, I'll tell you that Ruth had proposed marriage to Boaz in a really strange 3,000 years ago kind of way. We're looking at a 3,000 years ago kind of romance, all right? And Ruth had proposed marriage to Boaz. Last week, he said yes. Oh, he said yes. It was so adorable. And Boaz, though, knows of another potential kinsman redeemer, and that's the whole theme of this, is the guardian redeemer, kinsman redeemer, the person in the family that seeks justice for those who can't get it themselves, who buys back property for those who lose property, who will marry a widow in the family so that there can be a male to carry on the line and provide for the family. Really strange from where we're at today. We don't do things like that. But, it kind of made sense because Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth were both widows, and that was a tough place to be, a widow with no means of support back in those days, because women didn't have the rights that they do now. They can't just like up and go to work and start a business, and it was a whole different time. It was 3,000 years ago. So Boaz knows of another potential kinsman redeemer who is closer, that would technically have the right to do that redemption, to buy the property, to marry Ruth. And Boaz is a good guy. We decided that last week. Boaz is a good guy. He wants to keep all his cards on the table. He's not keeping any cards up his sleeve. He's doing business. He's a straight shooter. Everything's on the table. You know what you're getting with Boaz, and he's going to be honest about it. And he wants to give the guy the opportunity because it is his right. He could have very slyly just done this, under the radar. He didn't do stuff like that. He wanted to give the other guy the opportunity because it was the right thing to do, and Boaz is a good guy. So he sends Ruth back to Naomi with 6 measures of grain. We give flowers and chocolates. He poured barley in her shawl. And I don't know how romantic people would think that is now, but so he sends her back to her mother-in-law with 6 measures of grain. And we have this sweet romance developing, and it's undetailed. When we started this, we talked about how in Hebrew literature there's this thing they call lacuna, which is a gap in the details. It's not explicit, it's implicit. They give you the skeletal details, and it relies on us, the readers, to come along and fill in the details with our minds. It's a very active kind of reading. So we have this sweet romance without a lot of details. We got that gap in there that we have to fill in. So today, and again, things are going to wrap up rather quickly. It's the book starts doing 80 miles an hour, and it slows down, it takes a look at a few things, and now we're accelerating again. We're just going to accelerate to 80 miles an hour out of this book as we go. And as we do this, I want you to consider the 3 heroic characters that we have, that this whole book is centered around. And that's Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth. And heroes are interesting. We've all got heroes. Culture loves a hero. We love our heroes. And think in your mind about who your heroes are, whether in real life or fictional. We love a good hero story. We just love that. And that's been important in all cultures along the way. And what defines a hero, it's hard to say. I think sometimes it's easier to appreciate and admire a hero than to define what a hero is. And all these people in their own way, I think that the main thing that a hero does, no matter who it is, and we got these Marvel comic superhero movies that have been coming out, and I haven't been following them very much. I saw one like years ago that had Wolverine. I thought Wolverine is so cool. Big knives come out of his hands, and he's just, I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool hero. But I think the thing about heroes is that they're always there at the right time to do the right thing. Going back to Esther, for such a time as this, right? And that's one of our favorite things. We'll find ourselves in some situations and circumstances that we didn't expect to be in, but wow, for such a time as this. It's like, as it turned out, earlier in the book, as it turned out, Ruth was in the field of Boaz. Everybody's just trying to honor God and do the right thing, and everybody ends up in the right place at the right time. So consider these three heroes. Consider who your heroes are as we go through this. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 4. Just a little bitty book. And if you're trying to turn to it and you can't find it, it's because it's just hidden away. It's after Judges, before 1 Samuel. Those are your big, road signs. I open it up, I'm like, we're going to do Ruth. Open my Bible. Where the heck is Ruth anyway? I forget. It's been so long. Where is Ruth? I found it. So chapter 4, verse 1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. So Boaz is there, he's at the gate. And it's an interesting thing that the town gate at the time was where all the important people hung out, where legal matters were settled, where business was done, where transactions were done. I wish we had that. We got Tuolumne County where, it'd be nice if we pulled into town. It's like, oh, here's your city council members, here's your mayor, your police chief, here's all the important people in the county. In Tuolumne County, we pull up, here's our kid jail. Right when you pull into town. So back then, the city gate was where all the important people hung out. So he went, he knew he would find this guy because this guy was a guardian redeemer. He was a mover, a shaker, an important person like Boaz was. And so this is this hub of activity. And where a lot of business gets done. And he sees the Redeemer. And he's like, "My friend, come over here and sit down." You ever have somebody, "Hey, I need to talk to you." You're like, "Uh-oh." I would be a little concerned. "Oh, what does he want?" Okay, comes over, sits down. Then he gathers like a bunch of town elders around. "Come sit down." Now it's looking like an intervention, right? I'm sure this guy's like, got one foot in the starting blocks, ready to bolt. What's going on here? But it goes on in verse 3. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself." Now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. So weird. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So as the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," he said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. So now we got all the elders and all the important people gathered around. We got Boaz and the first guardian redeemer in line. And it's like, let's make a deal. It's like door one, or like an infomercial. Naomi came back from Moab, and she's selling this piece of land, and you're the first in line. Do you want the land? Will you buy the land? I assume that he would have some rights. He would be buying it back to keep it in the family. The property transferred after 50 years back to the family no matter what, but Naomi wasn't going to be around. in 50 years. She's getting up there, and that wouldn't benefit her at all. And she still needed a means of support. And so, yeah, Naomi has this piece of land up for sale. You're the first in line. Do you want to buy the land? She's like, sure. Who wouldn't? Nice piece of land. Sure, I'll buy the property. I will redeem it, he says. And then door number 2. He's like, but wait, that's not all. Order now, and you also get Ruth the Moabite as your wife. Door number 2, and he's like, no, I won't redeem it. And it's not that Ruth was ugly or homely or anything, I don't think. But why did he do that? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Boaz, he may have framed this to his advantage. You see how he did that? It's like door number 1, the property. He's like, sure, I'll take the property. Door number 2, you also get Ruth. It's like, no, I can't do it. You better do it. May have framed this to his advantage. And we do that when we argue and present our case, so don't we? But he wasn't being dishonest. He still put all the cards on the table and none of the cards up his sleeve. He was being totally honest. So why the Redeemer dude couldn't do it or wouldn't risk it is that he already had a thing going on. He had a family, he had an heir, and that by doing this, if something happened to his heir and he married Ruth and she produced a son, that now all his property would transfer to this other family. That's risky, and he couldn't do it, or he wouldn't do it. He could have, but he wouldn't risk it. Ruth, to him, was a complication that came with the property. It's almost like a divorce when you think about it. When you get divorced, you got this other person that gets between you and your stuff, right? And it's almost like a pre-divorce going on. He's like, well, I don't think I can do this. And, we here at Sierra Adventure Church recognize that divorce is a real thing. We don't pretend that's not a deal. We recognize that happens. I don't recommend it. Many of us have been through divorces. And part of what we do, Perez and Company included, if you're looking for a perfect pastor, there's probably some up and down the road that are better. I don't know. But it's like a divorce. And I wouldn't recommend anybody have one. But at the same time, we know they do happen. And our experience is that people who are divorced and try and go to church are not cared for well. They're marked. They're kind of, people don't know what to do with them. And we just welcome people in. So, if that's you, welcome. Welcome to our imperfect, busted up, broken little club. So you're welcome here. We recognize that. But yeah, it was kind of like a divorce, because by taking Ruth on, that would then in effect have the potential to get in the way of him and his property and his stuff, and he wouldn't do it. For Boaz, now check this out. This is the difference between the other kinsman redeemer and Boaz. For Boaz, the property was acquired as a means of obtaining his beloved. Isn't that good? That's like so much better. Boaz is a good guy. And he points forward 1,000 years to Jesus. He's what they call in the Old Testament, we have these people that come up that are a type of Christ. They represent what Christ is going to be like. They point down into the future, and 1,000 years before, here's Boaz representing what Jesus was going to come and do for all of humanity. Points forward 1,000 years to Jesus. And with Jesus, we, the broken and befuddled, don't get in the way of his rightful place. King of the universe, Son of Man, Son of God. He assumes the risk. He buys everything back to get us. You and me. Isn't that cool? So Boaz assumed the risk because it was the right thing to do. Then he loved Ruth. There's this little romance blooming where they're like so humble and they're not pushy with each other, and they give each one room to operate and say yes and no, and nothing's forced. There's this beautiful little romance. Boaz loved Ruth. And when love is involved, we don't play it safe. You put your heart on the line for somebody, whether it's, your children. I've heard it said that when you have children, that's the day you allow your heart to live outside your body, where you can't control it anymore. And you take the risk. And sometimes you get hurt in the risk. Boaz wasn't playing it safe. Verse 9, then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, after the whole taking off the sandal thing, I should have wore sandals today, so I could have taken it off. Hey, would you like to buy my car? Well, here. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon, the sons. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people of the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, and may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz stands up. He announces his intentions to everybody in front of all the witnesses. There's an importance of having witnesses, right? There's a reason that we do that to people at their weddings, where we put them up front and everybody sits around and everybody's watching what's going on. They're watching the promises being made. And so you can hold people's feet to the fire. It's good to have witnesses. There's a reason we have notaries, right? It's like, I was here, I saw this person sign, put my little, insignia on that. Boom, it happened. They did it, I saw it. There's an importance of having witnesses because you can hold people's feet to the fire when they need it. If you do things in a back room with cigar smoke, that's the government. That's how the government works. That's not God. That's not Boaz. And Boaz wasn't doing that. And with the witnesses, people have heard and they've seen and they know the deal, so they can hold people accountable for it. And then the witnesses make a statement, and this is interesting. This is where it gets really good for me. And I'll tell you the stories, and then we'll tie it in as we get to the end of the book. They say, "May she be like Rachel and Leah." And Rachel and Leah were the wives, plural, this gets weird and messy, I'm telling you, of Jacob. And it's interesting that they should be brought up, right? Because Jacob had a rough go. He was a scoundrel. He was a cheat, and he got cheated. The cheat who got cheated. And with these wives, they started the nation of Israel, essentially. Jacob, when he came around, when he was humbled and turned his life around, became Israel, which means God contends, right? And God struggles with. And isn't that true for all of us? I think that's true for the nation of Israel. I think it's true for us that, sometimes we struggle with God and we're figuring things out. We don't have all the answers. And if you do, I'd like to hear them because I need the answers. And so Jacob, the cheat, right? He was on the run from his brother who was trying to kill him. I'm just going to tell you these stories real quick. On the run from his brother Esau who was trying to kill him because he was a cheat. And so he runs up on this well one day, and up comes Rachel. And he's like, oh my goodness. He was so smitten with Rachel. It says he kissed her and he wept aloud. I mean, that's crazy. He's like sobbing, crying because he was just so in love with Rachel. And went to Rachel's dad, who was his uncle. Gets kind of weird. And he's like, oh, yeah, you can have Rachel as your wife. You're going to have to work for me for 7 years first. And he did it. Rachel must have been something. I'm just, putting that out there. Just crying out loud. I love you, Rachel. And 7 years he works for Laban. And then Laban's all right, time's up. And they have the wedding. And, weddings back then, the women were veiled. And then they would go in and they would consummate. And everybody would stand around the outside. And, sure, that's kind of awkward and weird, too. But, they take him in, they consummate. And he wakes up the next day, and Rachel's not there. It's Leah, the older, uglier sister, apparently. And he's like, what? And he goes out, Laban, I worked for you for 7 years. What did you do this for? He's like, well, around here we usually marry off the older sister first. He says, you can have Rachel too. It's going to cost you another 7 years. It's interesting that this is the story that's brought up. That's weird. That's gross. That's messy, isn't it? I mean, I'm the only one that thinks that's kind of underhanded and weird. And yet, Jacob became Israel, Rachel and Leah. gave the sons, that started the whole nation of Israel, that started the path genetically to Jesus, that started the begats and the begats and the begats, started the path to bringing Jesus into the world. So good things came out of a really gross and weird situation. Jacob and Leah had a son, Judah, who's also brought up here. Judah and Tamar. Tamar was widowed, so she needed one of those kinsman redeemers to come in and, carry on the name, get the property, have the means of provision for her and all that. Well, two of Judah's sons, you can go read this yourself, because it would turn R-rated if I told you the story of how it all went down in detail, okay? Just, there you go. But two of the sons did the wrong thing, and they died. I'm glad God's not that hardcore with us now, And they did the wrong thing, they died. He had one son left, and he's kind of feeling like Tamar is cursed at this point. He's like, well, am I going to give my last son to her too? He says, wait till she gets a little older, or he gets a little older, and then, so he gets a little older, and he doesn't move on it because he's scared. He thinks Tamar is cursed, and he's going to lose his last son, and that leaves him with no sons, right? So Tamar, wanting a redeemer, dresses up like a prostitute. And along comes Judah. And Judah won't do it, and Judah won't send his son to be the kinsman redeemer. Well, he sees this prostitute, he's like, hey, baby. That's messed up. That's so messed up. And so they, do things. And she's like, what do you give me? He's like, I'll give you one of my goats. He's like, well, how do I know you're going to give me one of your goats? She's like, give me something else, as a promise that you're going to come through with that payment. And so, he gives his little insignia, the cord around his neck, and that was one I don't remember what the other thing was. And so then she ends up pregnant. Big surprise, because that's what happens in such situations. And Judah's like, oh, she got pregnant out of wedlock. We're just going to execute her. And she's like, oh, hey, by the way, the guy that got me pregnant gave me this stuff. Does this look familiar? So that's weird. That's gross. That's a bad story, right? But out of that came Perez, who we're going to see in the ending credits of the story. Perez, who is another in line to bring Jesus, the ultimate kinsman redeemer, into humanity, right? He's in the family, in the genealogy of Jesus. So think about those stories for a minute, all right? My wife's over here, her eyebrows are going together. That's bad, huh? So verse 13, and we're going to come back to those. I'm not just going to leave you hanging with them. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he had made love to her, you're not going to see this on a flannel graph in Sunday school. That's why they don't let me do Sunday school, right? Remember Dwayne's last day? The Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Did you know this stuff was in the Bible? A lot of people was like, wow, really? Yeah, it's in there. The women said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better than 7 sons, has given him birth. Man, Ruth, better than 7 sons. Women weren't regarded well in that culture. And here Ruth says, she's better than 7 sons. You'd be luckier to have her than 7 strapping young boys. She'd really earned that name for herself. She'd become a hero in the story. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David, who David in his line in his genealogy brought Jesus to us. Right? So it all goes together. So Naomi, when she goes back to Bethlehem, she's like, don't call me Naomi. Naomi means pleasant. Call me Mara. That means bitter. She said, the hand of the Almighty has turned against me. She'd lost. And if you weren't with us on chapter 1, in 5 verses, she lost her husband and her boys. And she was there all by herself in a foreign land. Rough. And she goes back, she says, call me Mara, call me bitter. The hand of the Almighty has afflicted me, has turned against me. I am empty. And we talked about how with her there was no half empty, half full. She was full and she was completely empty. And we talked about how when you're completely empty, sometimes that's a good place to be because there's more room to put stuff in. And she got stuff put in. God was doing something and incorporating them into the family tree of Jesus. And he wasn't done yet, even though it looked like he was. And Ruth, better than 7 sons, earned her place in the heroic biblical Hall of Fame. Verse 18, and these are the ending credits. This then is the family line of Perez, who was the offspring of Judah and Tamar in that ugly situation. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab. These names, I'll tell you what. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, whose line brought about our Jesus. That's good. It's good news. So I'm going to get back to those stories. I promise. I'm not going to leave you hanging there in that gross, weird thing that just happened. So we have 3 people. This story is really about these 3 people doing what they can to honor God and have good character. Doing right by God and doing right by each other. Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth. They're part of the redemptive process. It was a bad situation for them, and they're part of a redemptive process that brings about the ultimate Redeemer. That is so good. Now, it wasn't fun, and it wasn't comfortable, and I'm sure if they could go back and, if they're sitting there, it's like, I am going to, I'm going to write my own adventure. I'm going to fill in my own ending. I'm sure it would have looked nothing like what happened. Nobody wants to go through that. Nobody wants to go through the grief of losing a husband and sons and being penniless and out in this strange foreign land and then going back empty-handed, not knowing how you're going to get provided for, not knowing what's going to happen. Nobody chooses that. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't ideal. It was far from perfect for all those involved. But it was totally perfect in the rearview mirror. You find that in life where you're like wondering what God's going to do and you're like, God, I need a sign. And sometimes he's a little quiet. I was talking to a guy earlier in the week. We meet for coffee and talking about how sometimes it'd be nice if God would just write on the wall like that one time. Speak from a burning bush. Oh, hey, look, a bush on fire that's not being consumed by the fire. I'm going to go over and see what's going on. I am that I am. I wish he would do that. But, he gives us enough light for the day. And then when we get through and then when we're looking in the rearview mirror, it's like, there he was. Oh, my goodness. Can you believe what he did out of that situation? 3 people brought together because Naomi went back to face her past. That was kind of heroic. She could have stayed on the run. She could have stayed in Moab. She could have gone somewhere else. It's like, I'm pulling up tent stakes and I'm moving elsewhere. I'm starting over. She went back rather than staying on the run. She went back to face her past. She went back as she faced her past then to embrace her future, whatever that was going to bring, instead of continuing to run. It's pretty heroic. A lot of people like to run. A lot of people are just, they make a career, they make a life out of running. And sometimes you guys knuckle down and face that person in the mirror and face what's going on and just sit down with it and make peace with it so that God can use that. And then in the rearview mirror, it'd be like, boom, there he is. I see him. I see what he did. Naomi, Ruth, one of our other heroes, tough as nails and yet tender and humble. Right? She was tough, rolled up her sleeves, got to work, providing for her mother-in-law. Man, that's awesome. And yet she was also tender and humble. She was the outsider from Moab. And Moab and Israel did not get along. And here she's like pulling up her tent stakes and going back to a place she's never been, to people she doesn't know, a whole different culture and country that doesn't like her. The outsider brought into the family of Jesus. And the outsider becomes the insider. Finds herself in the genealogy of Jesus. Isn't that awesome? The people in the margins. I love the margin people. Oh, the divorced, the people that aren't quite sure if they believe anything I say. Come anyway, right? Come anyway. I love those margin people Come be with us. We're kind of margin people too. Love the margin people. And Boaz, the good guy, doing the right thing at his own expense, assuming the risk, and in this case having to pay off for him. That's so good. And then, as you know, Boaz stands up and is like, you are witnesses, this is what I'm doing, this is what's going to happen. And the people cite these stories of Jacob and Judah. These stories are bad, and here we are. I told you I'm going to bring them back in. Right? I'm going to try and make some sense out of this. These stories are bad, but they're on display. The Bible doesn't hide this stuff. The Bible is not Facebook and Instagram, where it's like, hey, look at this picture, and I put a nice pretty filter on me so I don't look like myself. And look at how perfect my life is. Right? And you're just like painting this story. The Bible doesn't do that. It's like, oh, there's some good stuff, and you're like, here's bad stuff too. Here's really bad stuff, you know? And it puts it all out there on display. And when things are broken like that, God makes new things out of the broken pieces. And I was talking to my wife this morning. I suggested that we were arrogant when we think we can derail the will of God. And I've been there. And she's like, no, it's not arrogant. She says, I think it's ignorant. That was just this morning we were talking about this. Where you feel like, you know, the mistakes you make can derail the will of God. No. You can break things. You can create hardship for yourself. You can create hardship and pain for other people. But when you bring those broken pieces to God, he's like, yeah, you really messed that up. Well, let me see what I can make out of that. Pick up the broken pieces, start making some beautiful little mosaic of the thing you busted up really good. God makes new things out of the broken pieces. So your mistakes and your story can't derail the work of God. Look at Jacob and Judah. Those stories make me feel better about myself. And my story, sometimes our story, makes people feel better about themselves. It's like, wow, if God can pull that together and still use that, God's pretty awesome. So Jacob and Judah, these ugly situations that produce people that went on to start a nation, to continue a nation, to funnel us down in the genealogy to Jesus, to Christmas morning, to Easter. There's Advent and resurrection again, right? It's Easter all over. And God uses these imperfect people. He doesn't write them out of the story. He leaves them in there. They're part of it. Consider the women in the family tree of Jesus. And they are in there. Tamar, dressed up like a prostitute to get her way. Rahab, who was actually a prostitute, ended up in the family tree of Jesus. Ruth, the outsider, the foreigner that nobody liked coming in, comes in and just becomes a hero. Bathsheba, and yeah, there's an ugly story too. Yeah, and, you know, it's all right there on display. When people mess it up, God comes along and makes something new. So there you have it. So many imperfect stories.
It wasn't just the women screwing up.
No, but you know, but it put them in. They, you know, the women were not held in high regard back in that culture, and yet they are in there very much a part of the family tree, and not just the good women, but the imperfect women as well. So it's, you know, the good people, the bad people, the bad people who became good people, the good people who became bad people. They're all in the story. They are all there. So many imperfect stories, so many redeemed stories. So I just want to encourage you guys today as we wrap this up to let your story be redeemed. That was our big focus a couple weeks ago, was be redeemed. All right, and that sometimes it's hard to cut yourself enough grace as you're looking at yourself in the mirror to be redeemed. Jesus wants you as you are. Bring your story. Bring your broken pieces and let him make something new out of it. Be redeemed. Let other people be redeemed. That's hard. We live in a very binary culture right now where, you know, politics will make people hate each other. And, you know, we like split completely over the dumbest things. Let other people be redeemed. Right? And be part of someone else's redemption story. Tell your story. Can't be any worse. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it is. Than Judah and Tamar, Jacob. If you go back and read those, man, it's crazy stuff. I taught through the book of Genesis a long time ago, and I forgot how messed up these stories are. And then you get done with Judah and Tamar, and it goes into Joseph being thrown in prison in Egypt. It's these stories, and these imperfect things that are done by people and to people, that breaks everything into pieces, and God comes along and puts it back together. And as you look at it in the rearview mirror, it makes sense, as it turned out, right? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the day again. Thank you for your word, and just that you've kind of put it out there in a very brutal and unfiltered way, and we were just thankful for that. And that we would be able to come along and not filter ourselves, not filter our stories, that we would come to a place of just being transparent and honest with each other, with ourselves, trusting you to take the broken pieces and put them back together into something beautiful. Oh, you do. And it's just amazing looking in the rearview mirror to see what you've done, to see where you've interacted in these things where, we've been in pain, we've caused pain, things have not been perfect or good, and there you are in the middle of that, making something beautiful out of it. And we just pray that would just resonate in our hearts today, Lord, that this would give us peace, that this would give us just the drive to get up and go on. Sometimes we're just struggling, we just want to sit down and stay there, and that this would help us to get up and go on. And that you would go before us like you do, and we may not see what you're doing in the moment, but we see it in the rearview mirror, and that we just trust that goodness that you've had with us, that you've all along, all through this biblical history, Old Testament, New Testament, through the good times and the bad times, in the rearview mirror you were there, doing a thing, and we trust that you're going to do that for us in the future. Lord, go with us now, wherever we're going. We thank you, and we know that you've brought us here together during this time for a reason. Each one of us needed something here today. And I just pray that you've spoken to people what we need. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
You got the camera on?
I think so.
You got the angle that doesn't make me look fat?